moment the news broke of massive Iranian missile strikes on Israel, the atmosphere across U.S. military bases changed instantly. Sirens didn't need to sound. Every soldier, pilot, and Marine knew exactly what the alert meant. Combat readiness had been triggered. Within minutes, orders moved through command networks, and entire units sprang into motion. Marine Corps fighters and Air Force squadrons received the signal, and the calm of the base was replaced by controlled urgency. Buses rolled up to the barracks, and Marines carrying heavy gear climbed aboard in silence, heading straight for the airfield, where a giant C-17 Globemaster III waited under floodlights, with its rear ramp lowered like the mouth of a steel giant ready to swallow everything in its path. On the tarmac, the pace was relentless. Cargo handlers rushed back and forth with forklifts and flatbed carts, loading portable generators, crates of ammunition, communications equipment, and field medical supplies. Every inch of the aircraft's cargo bay filled quickly as Marines strapped their gear beside the equipment that would support them in combat. This wasn't just another training deployment. The flight plan included a stop at another base to pick up more troops and vehicles before continuing toward the Middle East, fully loaded, fully armed, and ready for whatever waited there. At nearby bases, the same scene was unfolding on an even larger scale. Several more C-17 transport aircraft stood lined up on the runway as armored vehicles slowly climbed their ramps. Tactical buggies, heavy armored trucks, and massive MRAPs designed to survive roadside bombs. Each vehicle was chained down inside the aircraft like pieces of a massive war machine being assembled in midair. Every flight meant more troops, more equipment, and more firepower moving closer to the region. But the real preparation was happening just a few miles away on another airfield. Inside hardened shelters, mechanics worked through the night preparing fighter jets that would soon dominate the skies. Panels were opened, avionics tested, radar systems calibrated, and wiring inspected piece by piece. Engines were checked, intakes cleared, and fuel systems verified. Then the weapons crews moved in. Missiles were mounted under the wings. Precision-guided bombs were locked onto pylons. Every jet had to be flawless, because these aircraft were about to begin days of continuous combat sorties against enemy military targets. Meanwhile, in a quiet hangar on the far side of the base, soldiers gathered around their gear for a very different kind of preparation. Duffel bags and rucksacks were spread across the floor as they packed uniforms, boots, hygiene kits, and the few personal items they were allowed to bring. Conversations were short and focused. Everyone understood the reality of the orders they had just received. This wasn't a short mission. This was an indefinite deployment to the Middle East. The destination was clear, but the return date was not. And as the cargo planes roared to life outside, every soldier knew the world had just moved one step closer to a much larger conflict. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the base fell into the dim orange glow of dusk, a final order echoed across the hangars: prepare for boarding. Instantly, the soldiers moved into formation. Rows of boots lined up on the pavement as they formed disciplined columns outside the hangar doors. Without unnecessary words, they began the steady march toward their assigned aircraft waiting on the runway. The massive silhouettes of C-17 transport planes loomed in the fading light, their rear ramps lowered like steel bridges into the belly of the aircraft. One by one, soldiers climbed the ramps, carrying their duffel bags and rucksacks, stepping into the dim cargo bay, where the long flight ahead had already begun to settle into silence. Inside the aircraft, loadmasters moved quickly through the cargo hold, checking every strap, every chain, every pallet. They verified the cargo, counted personnel, and confirmed that everything was locked down for flight. Once the final signal came, the ramp slowly lifted and sealed shut with a heavy metallic thud. Outside, engines roared to life. One after another, the giant transports taxied toward the runway. Moments later, under the cover of night, the C-17s thundered into the sky, their lights fading into the darkness as they headed toward the Middle East. Hours later, those same aircraft touched down on hot desert runways thousands of miles away. The moment the wheels stopped rolling, the rear ramps dropped and the unloading began immediately. Soldiers stepped onto the tarmac while crews unchained armored vehicles and drove them straight off the aircraft. Forklifts pulled cargo pallets out of the hold, while equipment and supplies were rushed across the airfield. Everything moved fast because every minute mattered.
And this was only the beginning. The same aircraft that had just delivered these troops would soon turn around and fly back again, repeating the journey over and over. More soldiers, more vehicles, more equipment were already preparing to follow from bases across the United States. The buildup in the region was accelerating. For the soldiers stepping down the ramp into the warm Middle Eastern night, the reality had fully set in. This base was now home, for as long as the mission required. There was no return date circled on any calendar. They picked up their bags, followed the directions of base personnel, and moved toward their assigned quarters. Around them, engines roared as more aircraft arrived in the distance. The operation was only just beginning, and the sky above the base was already filling with the sound of incoming flights.
Under the harsh lights of the airfield, the base never slept. Maintenance crews worked through the night, moving with quiet precision as they prepared fighter jets for the combat missions ahead. Across the apron, rows of aircraft stood ready, some exposed beneath the open sky, others tucked inside hardened shelters built to withstand attack. Fuel trucks rolled slowly from jet to jet. A mechanic climbed onto the fuselage, locking the single-point refueling nozzle into place as JP-8 fuel began rushing into the aircraft's tanks. On the truck's control panel, gauges ticked upward, while another crew member watched closely. When the tanks reached capacity, the hose was disconnected, the cap sealed tight, and the truck immediately moved on to the next waiting fighter. Close behind the fueling teams came the weapons crews. Specialized ordnance carts rolled across the tarmac, carrying missiles and precision-guided bombs. With careful coordination, technicians lifted air-to-air missiles onto the wingtip rails, locking them into position with precise mechanical clicks. Under the wings, hoists raised guided bombs onto the pylons, where each weapon was secured and connected to the aircraft's electronic systems. Wiring harnesses were plugged in, data links verified, and the aircraft's onboard computers confirmed communication with every piece of ordnance. Finally, bright red arming pins were inserted, small but critical safety devices that would only be removed moments before the jet taxied for takeoff. Then came the final inspections. Technicians moved methodically along the aircraft, checking mounting lugs, release mechanisms, and weapon alignment to make sure nothing was out of place. The same meticulous process repeated across the entire flight line: fueling, weapons loading, airframe inspections, avionics testing, flight control checks, and engine verification. Every bolt, panel, and system had to be perfect. There was no margin for error once these fighters entered combat. By the time the pilots finally walked onto the ramp for their mission briefing, the transformation was complete. The once quiet line of aircraft had become a fully prepared strike force. Every jet stood fueled, armed, inspected, and ready. All that remained was for the pilots to climb into the cockpits, start the engines, and launch into the dark sky toward the missions waiting ahead.